Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and later on our podcast channel. Bit of an extra episode for you guys. Today, the match preview will be out on Friday morning with John. He's just away on a little break, so we're going to record that a day later ahead of the game with Palace on Saturday evening. But we are joined by our chief sports writer, Lee Ryder. Lee, thanks for popping on to the pod. We're going to get some insight into the transfer window. It's January the 19th and Newcastle yet to sign anyone, but there's been plenty of links and plenty of rumours, not just incomings but outgoings as well. Lee, before we start looking at some of the stories that are out there, just kind of sum up what it's been like this window for you, because I think a lot of people maybe looked at the last January window and saw a lot of movement and anticipated it to be maybe as busy as it was this time last year, but it has been different. From your point of view on, reporting on it, how's it been for you so far in the opening few weeks?
Well, it wasn't a big shock that there wasn't this flurry of early transfers because we were literally sort of briefed about that and warned that it wasn't going to be like last year. And I think that message sort of went out there anyway. So, from a point of view of this being at this transfer frenzy, Newcastle spending loads of money, no one expected that in the early part of the window. The one thing Eddie Howe's consistently said is things could change, and there's still best part of 2 weeks to go, and I think Eddie's been pretty good with the supporters in terms of he hasn't led them down a certain sort of path. He's been pretty accurate with what he said. When there's nothing happening, he said, "Look, there's nothing happening," but he's also said things could change, and it looks like things are just starting to. I wouldn't say hot up because we're not quite there yet, but things are starting to develop behind the scenes where there could be movement, outgoings, and then possibly ingoings in the last throws of the window.
Do you think Newcastle have anticipated acting later in the window because of how good their January transfer window last year and how good their summer transfer window this year has been? It's not a case of a total rebuild job. It is a case of improving the squad, which is difficult in one way because it's already at quite a high level because of the success they've had in the previous two windows.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the last two windows Newcastle have had under the new ownership, got off to the flying start last January with Trippier and Wood, and then three other signings coming in the second half of the window. And then in the summer, they got off to the flying start again with a couple of signings, including Sven Botman. And then they've done a lot of the work at the end of the window. So this time, I think you just got to sort of like trust them to do what they need to do in those last throws. They do know that people are looking at them and possibly looking at trying to make a bit of a quick buck where and when they can, and Newcastle are trying to make sure they've got that reputation where they're not just throwing money around. I mean, you look at Nottingham Forest, funnily enough, the amount of signings they've made is just unbelievable. It is almost like playing Football Manager on a Friday night after the pub, just trying to sign everybody you can, and then worrying about the damage later. So I don't think that works. Just bringing in players for the sake of it, and I think Newcastle know that they need to plan carefully and make the right decisions. And if those decisions don't come off, then they've got to just stick with the process they've got because they have still got a lot of good players who currently aren't getting the game at the minute.
And I guess when you look back at the previous two windows, what we saw was in that January window, a couple of players who they wanted, they didn't manage to sign. Someone like Botman then arrived in the summer. Do you think whoever they may sign in the next couple of weeks, it will be someone that they've had a long-term look at, sending, whether it be Steve Nixon or another member of the department over to wherever to watch this player? It won't be someone where they've just gone maybe tomorrow and gone, all right, let's go and get that person. It will be someone that they've watched and worked out whether they'll fit into the squad, fit into the great atmosphere that's in the dressing room. Someone that they've really looked at hard.
Yeah, and I think Eddie Howe, he actually said it in one of his press conferences. He said, "When I'm looking at a player, I'm not doing it for the sake of it. I'm not doing it for the good of my health. I'm doing it because I want sign that player. And when it gets onto sort of Eddie Howe's computer, then that's when you know it's a serious one. So I think they've looked at lots of players. As always, they've been offered a lot of players. That's why you see so many links. I've seen a lot of windows where you wonder why 100 players, and it's because agents sometimes can be ringing round, clubs can be ringing round, and it ends up in the path of the media, and then they put their sort of take on it. So not every link is 100% accurate that you see, but at the end of the day, there's going to be some substance in some of them somewhere, because at the end of the day, Newcastle, they've got money to spend, and people are trying, as I say, there's agents and clubs trying to make money from Newcastle's situation. So it's a really testing window for Newcastle, this one.
And all those rumours and links and gossip, and of course the actual proper hard stories you can find in our dedicated live blog over on chroniclelive.co.uk. That's updated nearly every 50 minutes or so. So do head over to that and bookmark that. I guess one thing before we start talking about some of these links, Lee, everyone's pulling in the same direction at Newcastle, from Eddie Howe in the dressing room all the way up to the top level. And that's so refreshing when it comes to transfers, because, of course, in the previous regime, we had maybe players pushed on to a manager didn't really want him. We had managers wanting a position, other people going, well, no, we're not going for that. We've got X amount in the bank, and once that's spent, that's spent. The Joe Willock example, maybe the Joe Linton example is another one. But here, everyone is singing off the same hymn sheet. And just how refreshing must that be for Eddie Howe and of course, for the fan base as well?
Well, the structure's in place now at Newcastle, and it is still early days. People getting used to certain roles, but Newcastle made a good start with Dan Ashworth as a sporting director. He's right on top of all the transfers. Eddie Howe still has a huge say, if not the ultimate say, in who comes through the doors at the club. It's not a situation where we've had in the past where you had like Joe Kinnear trying to dictate to Alan Pardew who's going to sign. It's this is a proper setup. It's a proper arrangement, and Dan Ashworth's in the middle of that wheel that he spoke about, and he's dealing with all the different departments. So Eddie Howe, I would say, still has the ultimate say in which player comes into his dressing room, and at the end of the day, for Howe, he knows that it's on him, the signings. So he's got to get the right guys in the squad. But certainly he's had an excellent judgment in his time at Newcastle so far.
Great to see the ownership trust in Eddie's judgment in that, and like you say, so far it has paid off. Given Newcastle are third in the league, Lee, going great guns in the League Cup, but looking really good odds to at least qualify for the Europa League, hopefully for the Champions League. Do you think that would have changed the plans coming into this window, or do you see whatever happens in the remaining few weeks largely would have been the same, whether they were 8th or 9th, maybe just outside the top 10? It hasn't really changed, despite the fact they are flying so high.
Yeah, it's a really great question what you ask, and for me, it's like they've now got this golden opportunity to get into the Champions League. Clubs have tried to spend millions and millions and failed to get in the Champions League. Newcastle have now got what you could look at as almost a 19-game season to achieve the goal of well, it probably wasn't the goal at the start of the season, but to achieve the goal of getting into the Champions League, they've got 19 games to do it, and they've got a good buffer at the moment. So they've got a chance to bring in the players that will help them get them there in the second half of the season. It's come probably much earlier than people expected, but at the end of the day, Eddie Howe will see it as that opportunity. And you look at Saturday night. We'll see how Spurs go this evening against Man City, but let's say Spurs lose, Newcastle beat Crystal Palace. All of a sudden, there's an 8-point gap between Newcastle and 5th place. And you mentioned the Europa League there. The longer this goes on, the longer Newcastle are up there, the more of a disappointment it will be if they do drop into the Europa League. But I don't even think the players will be looking at it like that. I think they're just trying to win every game, and it is the old cliche, game by game. But that's exactly what the players have said to me. I spoke to Alexander Isak on Sunday night after the game, and he said it's about staying humble, and I think that's a great message. That don't get ahead of yourself. Just keep focusing on every week, and the rest of it will take care of itself.
Yeah, I'm getting corrected by people in the comments. Newcastle are indeed 4th. They're not 3rd. Of course, Man United drew against Palace, so apologies for that. Hopefully back up to 3rd over the weekend. Let's talk then, Lee, about probably the big story of the day. Chris Wood tipped to go to Nottingham Forest. Reports of a loan deal with an option to buy. What's your latest understanding on that? Is that something that you can see happening?
Well, my latest understanding as we speak is that Nottingham Forest want to sign Chris Wood. That part of it is established now. Newcastle obviously didn't plan to get rid of Chris Wood in this window. I think Chris Wood didn't plan to be leaving in this window. We spoke to him when we were in Saudi Arabia on the sort of pre-Christmas sort of winter tour in Riyadh, and we sat down at the hotel with him and spoke to him, and he said he was committed. He wanted to at least see out the 18 months of his contract that he had remaining. But in football, things can change quickly. I think if Eddie Howe has sanctioned Chris Wood leaving off, and I haven't got that 100% yet. If that is the case, then I would expect him to want to bring someone else in to replace him. I don't think he can. They need the 3 central strikers. They've obviously had tough times this season without Isak and stuff. I don't think they want to be in that position in the second half of the season. So I think a replacement would need to be sought. Although there are other players who can play in that central role, like Joe Linton and St. Maximin. So it wouldn't probably be it wouldn't be the end of the world, but it wouldn't be ideal either. So for me, I think it's one Nottingham Forest. They're the ones who are pushing for it, and I guess there'll be obligations within that deal to sort of talk about him as a possible loan player with a permanent deal at the end of it.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be an interesting one. And most of the comments, I think, Lee, when people have been reading this story, is about what would happen to the Newcastle striking options, because you have Alexander Isak, you have Callum Wilson. Thankfully, at the moment, both fit and both performing rather well, but they have got a history of injuries. And even if they were the 2 fittest players in the Premier League, having just 2 central strikers is always a massive gamble, isn't it? But if Chris Wood was to go, how easy would it be to bring someone in, do you think, and kind of sell them the move, which essentially would be your 3rd choice behind Isak and behind Callum Wilson? Or is it a case, look, it's a move to Newcastle United, you're going to want to come here regardless of whether you're first choice or 3rd choice?
I think there'll be a long queue of players jumping on that chance to get the move to Newcastle. It's a different proposition to what it was 12 months ago. So I think really 12 months ago, people were like, oh, I could sign and Newcastle could be in the Championship. Dan Burn, for example, he admitted that it could have gone another way. He could have signed for his boyhood team and he could have ended up playing in the Championship. But he was prepared to take that gamble. We're not in those realms anymore. We're in the realms of Newcastle could be playing in the Champions League next season. So you've got a real opportunity to play at the top table of the continental competition, and it would be a massive move for anyone who made it. So I don't think there'd be any shortage of players who would want to sign for Newcastle at the moment.
Certainly want to watch it. Although Chris Wood hasn't got the goals, that many maybe thought he would do. One thing he has shown is a fantastic attitude. Obviously well liked within the camp, but he has got a fantastic attitude, and that's something that Eddie Howe's mentioned, isn't Lee, about finding the right character. And that is another kind of, I don't really want to use the word issue, but I'm going to. It's another issue to deal with when you are trying to go out and add to your squad, because one of the main assets of Newcastle United right now is the group and is the feeling within the group. It's amazing, but at some point the boat might be rocked when you go out and buy a new player, and that's something they're going to have to get the balance with.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that Eddie Howe's exactly had a problem with so far. He's got the, I don't know, he's got the magic really to persuade someone that it's okay to wait for your chance. Jacob Murphy is a great example of that this week. If we're looking for examples, Jacob Murphy hasn't started a game since November in the Premier League. Yeah, he's coming off the bench and he's playing like, his life depends on it, as if it's a Champions League final. You've seen him come on against Fulham, and he had a huge part in that goal. And I think he's a really good, capable player. That when we're talking before about Newcastle have still got good players on board, and there's not as much pressure. Well, Jacob Murphy for me is one of those players, because one, he's a supporter of the club, but two, I think he's shown that he's prepared to fight for his place at the club. He went out on loan to a place like West Brom, Sheffield Wednesday, come back, and it would have been so easy for him to just completely sulk and just look for a move. But he fought for his place, got on with it, and now he's doing exactly the same again. And wouldn't surprise me if he plays a big part in the closing sort of stages of the season, and comes at one of the big moments. Certainly helped get a big win on Sunday against Fulham.
Yeah, it was a lovely takedown, wasn't it, for him, which kind of started the move. And I think aside from Chris Wood, or he might even be equal with Chris Wood, I think he's Eddie Howe's most used substitute. So that shows you how much faith he's got in Jacob Murphy. We've got some questions in the comments. What I'll do is we will turn. I mean, there are a few people saying they wouldn't want to sell Chris Wood or loan him out before the League Cup games against Southampton, just in case it goes to penalties, because he is very good at penalties. But yeah, we'll see what happens with that one. There's been a lot of questions over the midfield, Lee, kind of accelerated by that injury to Bruno Guimaraes. A lot of people, I think, even before Bruno picked up that injury, and thankfully it seems it won't be as bad as some feared, there was still a bit lacking in that midfield. You have Sean Longstaff, you have Joe Linton, Bruno Guimaraes, Joe Willock, but that's kind of all you have because of the injury to Shelvey. Elliot Anderson's picked up a knock as well. Do you see them making a move in this window for a midfielder? They've been linked to the likes of Tielemans, to Ruben Neves. Is it a position you can see Newcastle looking to strengthen?
Absolutely, because I think Eddie Howe's already touched on it, hasn't he, really, saying they are light in numbers in that position. Great news that Bruno's injury isn't as bad as first feared, but just goes to show you lose a couple of players in a certain position, like Shelvey and Bruno, and then the next thing they're you're one or two injuries or a suspension away from possibly having a bit of a crisis on your hands, really. And with a potential cup final on the horizon, then you wouldn't want to be going in that Wembley game with the opportunity to make history and be a couple of players short on the day. So I think that's an area that we'll be looking at. But by the same token, Eddie Howe's said it himself that they are looking in every position. They're looking at young players. They're looking at players for now. They're looking at players that can send out on loan. So there is a lot of options, and they are being very shrewd with the business at the moment.
It seems the main links, especially in that kind of midfield area, Lee, are coming from players who are already in the Premier League. Do you think that experience of playing in the top flight here in England is something that is Eddie Howe's particularly looking out for when he's looking at his shortlist for players he might be bringing in?
I see where you're going with it, but you look at someone like Isaac and Bruno. They weren't exactly players who had Premier League experience under the belt. So I think he's just looking for what you would call the elite player, and he's just wanting. He's paying for the mentality. Look at Bruno on Sunday. He didn't want to come off, and by the end of the first half, he was literally in tears because he must have been obviously going through the pain barrier, but he's obviously was processing at the time because the clever guys, some of these, Bruno must have been processing at the time that he could possibly miss a cup final here with this injury, and that's the sort of player you want on your team, that they just don't want to miss a second of action. So Eddie Howe's looking for those players that I would say are the elite player and trying to get Newcastle, to the highest level they can get.
In terms of the midfielder, have you got any insight into what maybe sort of midfielder they're looking for? Is it someone that's a bit more defensive where they can break up the play? Is it someone that can score a few more goals than maybe the likes of Bruno, Willock, Joelinton have done? Is it someone that can spray the ball about like Shelvey can? Or is it maybe a mixture of all three? Where do you think Newcastle will be aiming for in terms of this midfielder?
Well, I think I spoke to someone at the start of the season, or maybe it was the end of last season, I think, actually, and they were talking about Bruno actually wanting to play further forward, and so that could come into the equation. But I think hard workers is the probably what I would be saying there, because Newcastle, the way they play now, they're flying forward. It's great to see how hard players are working. You look at Sean Longstaff's heat map the other day, and he was everywhere, covered every blade of grass, and that's what Eddie Howe's introduced to these players. What can be achieved, and Kieran Trippier said it as well. He said, even if you're not playing well, you need to be running around a lot, and that sounds like really simple advice, but we've had it in the past where players haven't been running around; they've been moping around. That's why you're down in the bottom half of the table when you have that attitude. You've got to try and make things happen, and you've got a group of players now who are trying to make things happen in a big way.
100%. And Graham Morton's made a good point here that we're shopping in the quality aisle now, not cut price. Whoever comes in will be able to make an impression, and you can see that, Lee, with the names who are linked, the likes of Ruben Neves, who I think this time last year was linked to Manchester United. Tielemans, another one that was linked to Arsenal and Manchester United. These are top quality midfielders who have proven they can do it in the Premier League. And that's the bar Newcastle have set now with the likes of Trippier and Bruno, who I know wasn't in the top flight, but that's where their level is at now.
Yeah, I would agree to that to an extent, but what I would also say is that it's not just it is quality, and you do want to be in the quality aisle, but the out of contract players, the Bosmans, that having the sort of acumen to go out and sign a player who, you could be picking up a £20 million player for nothing in June. There's players on that list that scoured the out of contract players. So I don't think you can necessarily say the bargain line's closed for business or the bargain aisle is closed for business, because there could still be one of those out there as well. So I think from Newcastle's point of view, they've just got to be really clever in the transfer market, which they have been. To be fair, you look at some of the clauses that they've triggered. Bringing in Nick Pope for the price they got him was just unbelievable business. Like, best goalkeeper in Europe for like £10 million. It's like, it's just beyond belief. Where you consider where Newcastle, the journey we're all on as fans, and you see it where Newcastle were and where they are now is just unbelievable.
Yes, and yeah, I was just going to mention there the success they've had with the clauses in the contracts. Knowing that either for instance, Kieran Trippier, he wanted to come back to England, knowing that, or Chris Wood had a release clause of whatever. It's doing their homework, like you say, and it's been really impressive to see that. There's also been a link to, more than a link to Ivan Finesta, the young fullback from La Liga. We know, Lee, I think he did the story that Steve Nixon's already, scouted him quite a few times, and that any deal would potentially see him maybe loaned back to his club over in Spain before arriving permanently on Tyneside in the summer. Can you give us any update on that? Is that still something that's ongoing in the background?
Yeah, I think Newcastle are still very much sort of active in that transfer. His agent is obviously over here now. I think it's caused a flurry of excitement with his agency. There was some contacts with them yesterday, and it's one where there's obviously other teams interested, but I think Newcastle could be the best move for him. But you've got Arsenal, Man United in there, could go down there and be down the pecking order, or he could come here, go on loan to his current, and start for really in and around it. So that'll be a choice for him, I guess. But Newcastle have proved if agents don't want to do a deal, they'll quickly move on to somebody else.
Yeah, they're not going to be held to ransom. Just a quick comment here from Dan Kane. He asks, do you think Sean Longstaff is going to be put under the microscope if we do sign someone? I mean, you've already mentioned there, Lee, how well he did on Sunday, wasn't it, when Bruno went off, stepping into that kind of anchor role, pulling the passes, putting the cross in, which led to the goal. He's really been in the best form of his career for the last kind of few weeks. And I suppose anyone that comes in, they're gonna have to compete against Sean Longstaff and try and get him out of the first team, let alone the likes of Bruno and Joe Linton and Joe Willock.
Yeah, I mean, it's for me. I've watched Sean Longstaff go right through the club system, so it's great when you see a player really take his chance. And I think I remember watching him in a reserve game where I think he scored about 3 or 4 goals one night, and he just went from strength to strength. Then he had obviously issues with sort of the reserve team coaching staff, and there was like a time where there was a question mark over his head, which I couldn't believe at the time. I couldn't believe that they were prepared to not really push this player on. Rafa Benitez, he rectified that, and then obviously had injury problems, issues with Steve Bruce, and his career. You wondered which direction it was going to go in, but Eddie Howe's really sort of coached the player and got him back to that. If you go back to that level where when he first came on the scene in 2019, and he had like pundits like Jamie Redknapp were like really enthusiastic about him because he was playing well, and then he got injured at West Ham, I think it was, and now I think he's been pretty much put back into that category where he was, but probably with a little bit more, probably an all-round polished player. And the thing is, like, some people were like criticizing his finishing, but I know that there's goals in that player as well because I've seen it. He scored a few anyway for Newcastle. We've all seen it, but I think there's probably more goals in. So when you're talking about midfield, other positions he can play in, he's a valuable player because obviously he can play further back. He can play, in the number 8 role. He can play further up as well. I think he played as a number 10 at Bournemouth a few years ago and had a really good game, scored a goal. So there's so much Newcastle can do with him, and really it's just great that it's paying off for him at the minute because he's such a good guy.
Yeah, Graham says every team needs a workhorse. Longstaff has grasped his chance and repaid Eddie back in spades. Fair play to the lads, and I'm just glad to see him getting in the positions where he's going to score goals. Yes, he's missed a few chances in the previous few games, but he's getting in them positions consistently, which can only benefit him. And once one goes in, the rest will probably follow. It'll be like the domino effect. So great to see. There's been a lot of interest, Lee, in what Chelsea are doing at the moment, spending like there's no tomorrow, and what that potentially means for their fringe players. And one person in particular, Conor Gallagher, who was strongly linked to Newcastle last summer and in the January before that as well. He went to Crystal Palace and he did well there on loan. He's been in and out of the side under Potter. And with the signings that they've made so far this window, you suspect that he's not really going to get much an opportunity first team anyway. Could you see Newcastle maybe looking to take advantage of the situation down at Chelsea and looking at them fringe players who are quality, and maybe looking to bring someone in like Gallagher in?
I think with Chelsea now, because we've kind of like shot off into the distance really, and we're occupying a place what they would like to be in, which is Champions League. I think it'll be difficult for them to do too much business with us. I'm sure that there will be possibilities, but if I'm Graham Potter and I'm under pressure, I'm gonna be thinking, am I gonna loan my players to Newcastle so that they can, get that Champions League place that really we should be getting? That would be a difficult one. A different time now to the summer. In the summer, Newcastle was probably a good club for Chelsea to loan players to, but now obviously things have changed a bit. So I think it's a watch this space on that one.
Yeah, you're right. You wouldn't want to be given a rival team the advantage, would you? I mean, imagine if you Gallagher arrived and scored the goal that secured a Champions League spot for Newcastle instead of Chelsea. It would be something that Chelsea would live to regret. Luis Carrias has signed a new deal or an extension to the deal, Lee. He's impressed Eddie Howe, even though he's barely featured. And I think a lot of people were impressed with him over in Saudi in the friendly. What's the thinking behind that? Is that just another body to add competition to the goalkeeping department? Does it mean someone like Carl Darlow or Martin Dubravka might head out? What does it all mean for that department?
Well, it was a strange one because when we were in Saudi Arabia, that was the talk of the camp was Loris Karius signing his new deal, and then it went quiet for a while while the negotiations were going on. But they've got that done now, so that's a good quality goalkeeper to have on board. You can't have 5 goalkeepers, so I'm assuming that it will be Carl Darlow could be in contention for a loan move. Hasn't done anything wrong really, apart from be in the side and push on. So trying to push on and being able deputy to Nick Pope, who's been, let's be honest, he's like player of the season candidate. So it's tough. Someone's got to probably leave the squad. So for Eddie Howe, he'll just be happy that he's going to have 3 or 4 quality goalkeepers to pick from.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, all those good teams have had those quality goalkeepers down the years, and it's what you need, isn't it, to try and ensure some success. Just briefly, Lee, on other potential, loans. We've mentioned there the Chris Wood situation and what that would potentially mean in terms of maybe an incoming. But is there anyone maybe in the youth setup that you think could be handed an opportunity? We know Ali Anderson's well thought of, and he has picked up a knock, but it doesn't look like he'll be going out on loan. But could someone like Dylan Stevenson be handed an opportunity to maybe replace Wood if indeed Wood does go to Forest?
I'm sure he would jump at the chance if he was. I spoke to him after they won 5-0 in Riyadh, and he came off the bench and scored, which was a great moment for him. Certainly a player that'd be hungry to try and push on and do that. But if we're being a bit more realistic about it, he would probably benefit more going out on loan, getting 20 games under his belt, getting some goals, getting some confidence, then coming back in pre-season where he can push again, because he's one of the best players in the under-21s at the moment.
Yeah, and we talk about Longstaff and his success out of loan at Blackpool and what have you. A success story of what happens when you can go out on loan, and hopefully if Stevenson does get a move, the same can happen. Just briefly then, Lee, Crystal Palace on Saturday, we saw them draw 1-1 with Man United last night. Won't be an easy game. Selhurst Park always a difficult place to go. How do you think Newcastle approach this one?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Palace up until last night was struggling badly. Got absolutely turned over off Tottenham at the start of the year. Been knocked out of the cup, but they probably got a deserved point last night, and that'll give them confidence. I think Pat Vieira was saying afterwards it felt like a win, so he'll be trying to get everything he can from his players. But it's certainly a game what Newcastle this season have had. They'll be going down there expecting to win. That's where they've come in a short space of time. I remember going down to Crystal Palace in the last few seasons, and if you got a point, you were like really, really happy with it. You were like getting the train back up home, thinking, "What a good point that was." Obviously, Newcastle have won down there as well. They won in the lockdown season, and I think it was Graham Jones guided Newcastle to a point there last year in caretaker charge. So it's a tough place to go, but it's a good ground for Callum Wilson. So I think he might be looking forward to this game.
Fingers crossed. And we will, of course, talk to you before the League Cup semi-final, but just give me your thoughts on the draw. I mean, you'll be down at St Mary's, and the away fans will be down there in their numbers. I think it's about 3,000 tickets they've got. It is a brilliant opportunity, isn't it, to get to that first League Cup semi-final since 76?
Oh, really, because Newcastle have played the Cup so well. Obviously, the FA Cup was a disappointment, but they played the League Cup so well, getting the selections right. And the beauty about this now is there's two legs, so it's going to be wide open. Even if you do get a bad result down there, which I'm not expecting Newcastle to do, you've still got St James's Park waiting for you to potentially roar you to Wembley. So I think it's a real opportunity to finally just break this duck and finally get silverware in the cabinet. But there's a long way to go yet. But 180 minutes where I think everybody in Newcastle will just be literally watching the screens if they're not down at St Mary's, of course. Pubs will be packed. There'll be people will be focused on nothing but Newcastle trying to get to a cup final, which it's exciting. I haven't been in this position for a long time, and it's great to be in this position in January, where sometimes we've been here as Newcastle fans and the season's over. The season's over apart from maybe a relegation battle. So to have that to play for and Champions League contention, it's just an exciting time to be around Newcastle at the moment.
100% it is, and we'll bring you, of course, all the build up to that game. But first, it will be the game against Crystal Palace. Lee will be down at Selhurst Park to bring live coverage of that over on our website. You can also find Lee over on YouTube. If you just search Lee Ryder, you'll see Lee's YouTube channel, and he brings you content from his trips away and home. So do hit subscribe on that as well, and head over to chroniclelive.co.uk, where our live dedicated transfer blog is underway. You really will want to keep an eye on that, because we'll keep you up to date with everything that's going on regarding Newcastle and the January transfer window. Lee, thanks for popping on to the pod. To you guys watching and listening, thank you very much for tuning in, and enjoy the rest of your week.